So again, welcome all to PEER's first meeting of the new year 2024. This monthly meeting will feature Sandi Brewster-Walker and Fred Thiele. We start our meetings always with a land acknowledgement. PEER recognizes that our members are fortunate to live on the ancestral territories of the Manhasset, Montaukett Indian, and the Shinnecock Nations lands. PEER, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is a chapter of NYPAN, New York Progressive Action Network, and we are a multi-issue grassroots organization committed to advocating for issues that impact all folks on Long Island, including healthcare, housing, climate, and social justice issues. And we do that through electoral politics and issue-oriented engagements. So we hope that you will consider joining PEER if you're not already a member, or renew your membership, and Tina will tell you a little bit about that in a moment. I'd just like to start to sort of let you know what to expect tonight. We're going to start the meeting with a presentation by Sandi Brewster-Walker from the Montaukett Indian Nation about the current status of legislation for reinstatement of the Montaukett Indian Nation, and Fred will potentially pitch in on that. After that, Fred is going to talk about the 2024 New York State legislation session and where we can focus our peer advocacy in the coming months. Both sessions will have time for questions and answers, and Jerry's going to monitor the chat for that and let you know when you can ask your question. So thank you for that. I'm going to actually turn it over now to Tina Jacobwitz, who's our treasurer and secretary, and she's going to talk a little bit about PEER membership. Tina.
Hi, everybody. Well, it's that time when we hope you will join PEER by sending in your dues. It's $25, $15 for seniors, and students, I think, are also 15, right, Catherine? Students. Not that we have any right now, but 10. Oh, 10. Okay, sorry. So 25 regular, 15 for seniors, and 10 for students. And you can either pay through Act Blue, and Catherine has posted it, or send me a check, and I will mail it to NYPAN. So I hope you will all join very soon. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tina. And for those who are curious, membership enables you to vote on key issues, including endorsements and other statements or positions that we take as an organization. And if anyone has any questions, they can either reach out to Tina, or myself, or any member of the core committee about it afterward. So tonight we're really pleased to have with us Sandi Brewster-Walker, who is possibly Zooming to us from Long Island. Sandi, are you on Long Island?
I'm in Amityville.
In Amityville, okay, terrific. So for those of you who haven't met Sandi yet, Sandi is an independent historian, a genealogist, a freelance writer, and a business owner. She is the chairperson for the Board of Trustees and acting executive director for the Indigenous Peoples Museum and Research Institute. She served as deputy director of the Office of Communications at the USDA in President Clinton's administration. In addition to that, Sandi is a member of the Montaukett Indian Nation and executive director of Government Affairs Office. On Long Island, she's a member of a number of boards, including the Long Island Museum and the Friends of Plum Island. And her resume goes on for at least another page, but maybe I'll break at this point, and please ask you to welcome to PEER, Sandi Brewster-Walker.
And thank you. And I'm glad to be here tonight. Sorry you don't get to see me live. As I was explaining, my hair is all over my head and everything else tonight. But the first thing I wanted to do was to introduce you to some of the Montauketts. And I'm going to try to share my screen again. There it goes. Okay. These are some of the Montauketts. Oh, wait a minute. There we go. The first lady on the left-hand side, as you look at the screen, was at the 1910 trial. That's Mariah Fowler, Farrow. I think she goes on, she marries a Cooper and a Banks. And that's her son Wyandotte next to her. And most people at the East End of Long Island know Stephen Farrow. And they've passed the bar, Stephen Farrow's bar. But the interesting thing, he never drank. And then I think that's Sylvester Farrow. These are paintings by David Bunn Martin. And they will be hanging sometime this year, hopefully by the end of the summer, in the Fowler House. And if you go to the second row, that's my grandmother on the left, my mother's mother. I'm Montaukett on both sides of my family.
Wow.
Yep, but that's my mother's mother, and she was a Fowler. Alberta Fowler Jackson, and she married a Scurlock. Some of you might know the Scurlocks. There was a famous photographer down in DC who was her cousin. And the ladies all standing there are Montaukett dancers today. And that picture was actually taken at Fire Island 2 years ago in February. And that's how warm it had got that day. And that the Secretary of Interior was also there. And in the lower left-hand corner, that's Chief Robert Farrow. And he's a direct descendant. Every one of our chiefs, except one, has been either a Fowler or a Farrow. And most people also get very confused. They think we were just based at the end of the island. The Montaukett territory actually ran from Orient Point and Montauk all the way to Hempstead. One of the Montaukett's chiefs actually signed all of the deeds. The only places that we didn't govern was Setauket, where the Uncas are in Mastic, or on the Poospatuck Reservation, and Shinnecock. But we were all cousins. And there was never 13 tribes. I like to tell people that right from the beginning, because most people have been told that there are 13 tribes. Those were actually names of territory, not tribal nations. And if you go through, as I've done, and I've also done it with John Strong, and you go through and you look at all of the different deeds, you'll see they started out saying Indians of a place, like Indians of Montaukett, and then later became the Montaukett Indians. So no one really knows what the original tribal name was for a lot of the tribes, but they became known as the Montaukett Indians. Now, also, too, right now, we're in our 114th year of fighting to get our recognition back. But there are a couple of interesting points. One is the fight actually began, I think it's about 100 and, I did the math a little while ago. It's 140 some years, 154 years ago, in 1874. That's when the first case, this was actually 4 cases where we were fighting for land. But the last one is the 1910. But 6 years before the 1910 case, the Larrabee, who was the acting commissioner of the Department of Interior, stated that we were recognized and we existed. And the federal government went on to count us even after 1910. They counted us up until, I think it was 1924 or 1934. And it was right before the Reorganization Act. So we have 2 parallel fights going on right now, or case, I'm trying to find a better word than case, issues going on right now. The state issue, trying to get back our recognition, and the federal issue, which Senator Schumer's office is helping us with and helping us do the research with, because it seems that our recognition so far was never taken away from the federal government. we don't know what, no one can seem to find out what happened in the 1930s besides the Reorganization Act for Native Americans that would have taken away our recognition. But getting back to the 4 cases, the cases actually started about the same time as the Gilded Age and the when the robber barons were grabbing up land. You also had the Morrill Act out in the Midwest that was taking land and giving land to universities like Cornell. They gave, I think it was 990,000 acres. It ended up being a total of to Cornell University, and they're trying to give it back to the Native American community. But a lot of there was a lot of land grabbing going on, and most of it was really suspicious or illegal or something like that. But similar to the land grabs in the Midwest, you had people like Benson and Colbert actually doing their own land grabs here on Long Island. And I've kind of nicknamed it the Montaukett or the Long Island's Trail of Tears, because they were just an average person. They were made to feel less than people, or we were made to feel less than a human being. But this went on like from 1870 all the way up to 1910. And it was just horrible. But you had these robber barons coming and gathering or taking our land, running them off. There was some houses burnt at Montauk. Some people were paid $25 for the houses. When you read through the transcript of the last case, the 1910 case, it really gets you very upset. And you don't have to be Montaukett to get upset about it. Let's see here, because I can go off and keep talking about stuff. Right now, we have something like 1,200 people nationwide that are blood right enrolled citizens of the Montaukett Indian Nation. Here on Long Island, we actually have 400. And I want to mention, too, that when you go through the transcript of the last case and a couple of the others, you'll see it always talked about the Eastern Montaukett Indians. And no one really ever questioned, well, where are the others? But transportation was very different than what it is today. Or besides having 200 people in the room, if transportation was better, they'd probably have had more like 400 or 500 people in the room when the Blackmore decided that we were no longer Indians. Also, I should have mentioned too, that my research on this actually started when I was 17. And I'm going on my 82nd birthday this coming June. So I've been digging into the whole history of the Montaukett Indians for all those years. Even when I worked in Washington, I used to spend my evenings at the National Archives or at the Library of Congress going through the papers that they have on the Montaukett Indian Nation. Let's see, I had some other things I wanted to mention. Oh, before I get off the call, if you'd like to get our newsletter, or some of you might already get it, or join our book club, which will be going through John Strong's book again this year. If you just text me or put in the chat your email address, I'll make sure you get our newsletter. Our goal this year is 2 things. One is to see if we can come to a middle ground with New York State. They mentioned a couple of things in the last veto. I think it was veto 62. I forget the exact number of it. But the first paragraph, the person that wrote that veto actually had probably never read the case. Because if they had read the case and the transcript, they'd have seen that it was very racist. And then in the middle paragraph actually sounded like something like some of my best friends might be Black or have an Indian friend. And then the last paragraph in the veto actually said that it was the same bill. And as the Assemblyman knows, it wasn't the same bill. This time we went in and made the bill just for the Montaukett Indian Nation. And that's what they should be looking at. None of the pretend Indians or the splinter groups or anything like that. They should just be looking at the Montaukett Indian Nation. And I've given them thousands of pages of information, and they said that they were still missing some. Well, the 54 questions that they're missing, some of them are really ridiculous. They don't really relate to anything important in the Montaukett Indian Nation. They're things like, I had mentioned the kitchen scrubs that are in most of the museums around Long Island that the Montauketts made and sold, and Stephen Farrell would walk all over the island. Well, they wanted to know, how did that relate to the Montaukett Indians? And they're just kind of ridiculous. So I hope on Thursday we can come to some middle ground. And
Sandi, you mentioned there was 2 goals, so that was the first one. What would be the second goal?
The second goal is not, it doesn't really apply to state recognition, is to continue to work with Senator Schumer's staff. I'm working with Mike here on Long Island, and Senator Schumer actually has a person that deals with Native American affairs. And we've been talking every month and to put in for our federal recognition. And I think that's going to be much easier. And we at least get more with our federal recognition. We get nothing really when we get state recognition. It's just really ending the case and letting our ancestors rest in peace finally. Because New York State does not have a Native American Bureau or department or anything else. They just have the Child Welfare Act, and you get health benefits. Well, I did a poll through the Montauketts, and we all have health benefits. And only once in the last 30 years has there been an issue about that would affect the Child Welfare Act, which really covers if a child comes up for adoption, the tribe gets it first, or has the opportunity. Somebody who's a Montaukett member would have the opportunity to raise the child first.
Okay.
And that's the issue. I also wanted to mention too, we have clusters all throughout Long Island. Like I said, we go all the way up to Hempstead, and we've always been like that. Over in South Hole, going back to the late 1600s, people actually reserved land for the Montauketts. And the lieutenant governor came down in the 1700s and verified that land was set aside for us. But I think that's the things that I wanted to mention on my list.
Okay.
I could go on, though, and talk about the Montauketts forever. I have actually something like 90 3-inch binders.
Wow.
In storage of information about the Montaukett Indian Nation.
Well, that's a lot of information. I think maybe right now I might stop your screen share and maybe ask
Sure.
Fred if he wanted to maybe just make any comment, Fred, about the status of the legislation and what we might be able to do to help the Sandi and the cause there.
Yeah, well, thank you, and it's always a pleasure to work with Sandi, and it's been a long journey. We've been working on this now. I think the first bill that we put in was almost 10 years ago now, and it's the bill has been vetoed. I think this last year it was the 5th time. And as Sandi said, I mean, really what at heart here is trying to reverse this court decision that was made in the last decision was in 1914. Farrow versus Benson. That was the case. And we know who the Farrows are. Benson, that name you'll know from Montauk also. And I think Sandy described him as somewhat of a land baron, and I think that's right.
A robber baron.
The robber baron. And, if you know Bensonhurst in Brooklyn, that's that Benson, the Benson reservations, the properties in Montauk. And, how this case came about is all this time. And we've heard this story repeated over and over again. And that was that, a New York State Supreme Court, in one of the most racist decisions you're ever going to see by a court in the state of New York, literally terms in some of these decisions, describing the Montauketts as shiftless, and that they weren't really an Indian nation anymore. They had been absorbed into civilized life, language like that. So just really, stuff that we look at now and are appalled by. But that case, in order to quiet all the land claims and all the lands that had been acquired by Benson, had to make a finding that the Shinnecocks did not exist anymore as a nation and as an entity. And that was the wrong decision. That was a hideously wrong decision. And this legislation has really been about reversing this decision and, restoring what should have never been taken away from the Montauketts to begin with. And I think that's, not only is it unfortunate that the governor's veto cites this, very racist decision from 1914, but the idea that something that was wrongfully taken from the Montauketts, that the legislation simply seeks to restore that, to make the Montaukett Nation jump through all of these hoops to regain what should never have been taken away from them in the first place, I think is, at heart is what's wrong with the governor's vetoes. Nevertheless, again in November, the bill was vetoed. And, as you can hear from Sandy, and it's certainly in my role as state legislator, we're not giving up. And there's certainly been a lot of press and a lot of attention to this veto. And I think it's, really, including in the New York Times, very critical of the governor's veto. Newsday has been very critical of the governor's veto. And here locally, I think April Gornick has kind of led the charge on a lot of this, but there's a petition that's been sent to the governor with over 20,000 signatures, supporting this legislation. So, we're doing everything we can to really bring public attention to this and get the governor to take a second look. Sandy mentioned a meeting on Thursday. We actually have a meeting in New York City with high-level staffers from the governor's office. A year ago, we had passed legislation about, protecting Indian burial sites. The governor vetoed that bill too, and we were able to marshal a lot of public support, and the governor reversed her position on that, and hopefully she'll do that again. So, we're going to reintroduce the legislation. We're having discussions with the governor's office. We've tried to marshal as much public attention and public support for this. And it's simply trying to correct a historical wrong that was done over a century ago. And it should be corrected now. And, we're going to continue to work in that regard. I should also point out this bill last year, when it passed in the Assembly and the Senate, was unanimous in both houses. It was bipartisan, 213 members of the legislature. There were no votes, and there were no votes. Everybody voted in support. Wow. So, we'll continue to work for this, and we're going to see if we can convince the governor to reverse her position.
Yeah. Fred, we had members of PEER and followers call the governor's office and email at the end of the year, basically stating our support for the reinstatement. Shall we do that again in advance of the meeting that you're having on Thursday? Would it make
We have the meeting, it's,
And then,
the day after tomorrow. Let's see how that meeting goes. Sandy and I will both be there meeting with the governor's people. And we can assess what we need to do after that.
yeah, I've had a number of organizations wanting to know what their call, what our call to action is. So I'm actually going to put together a sheet, which I'll make sure you get. But if I could just add two things in, that Fred reminded me of. This, the cases actually started during that period where they wanted to take the Indian out of Indian. And that was the same period. So they were trying to make us not be Indians or not seem like we were Indians. And then there's also, I wrote a paper on it, there's the issue of complexion versus race. The Indians on the East Coast never looked Spanish like the Portuguese or the Spanish from Spain. And the Indians west of the Mississippi did. So we did not fit the image. We have always come in all shades of brown on the East Coast, from Maine all the way down to the Seminole Indians. And then the US Census from 1790 all the way to 1940, they had if you go to the instructions, most people just look at the census. But if you go to the instruction, it said, because remember they used to knock on your door and ask you questions. I think most of us would remember that. Some people wouldn't on here, but they would ask a person, which race are you? Or they would also determine the race of the person. So the instructions actually say, and you can Google them online, if a person is white and Indian, mark them as Indian. If a person has color in their skin or they're brown and Indian, mark them as Negro or Black. So the census had these racist instructions for so they were actually eliminating us. And I'll send you a copy of the paper that I wrote on that and cited all the different census years.
Thank you, Sandy. I mean, you've already brought up so many important points that I think many on the call may not have been aware of. So we really appreciate that. And I'm going to ask Jerry maybe to see if there's any questions in the chat that you could put to Sandy.
Well, John Kreidler has asked, how is cooperation between the tribes on Long Island? And John, I'm not sure. I think, do you mean in relation to this issue or in general in cooperation between tribes for other issues and so forth?
And John, I could tell you, I could probably answer a lot of that for you. The cooperation is very good because most of us are cousins. And most of us have the blood right Indians and most of the enrolled Indians that are with any of the tribes, like Helen Selzo and Montaukett, she's my cousin. Her father had married, his first wife was one of my cousins too. And then if you talk to Lance is a cousin. Lance comes on Shinnecock, and he's part Montaukett and Shinnecock and has a little bit of Unkeechug in him. We're all just, there was no one else around at one time to marry. Both as I mentioned, that was a picture of my grandmother, but my father's father was also Indian. So they were both Montaukett Indians with a little bit of Shinnecock and everything else in them. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it certainly does. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Good. And that's it. We don't have any other questions at the moment.
I think I see there's one from Thiele in the chat.
I'm sorry, Taylor, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Sure, thank you. I was just curious that now that we're in the landscape of the Pope having repudiated the doctrine of discovery, and just in general, like on the national level, I know that there's this attempt to look at United States Supreme court case laws such as Justice Ginsburg, Cheryl versus Oneida Nation case, which she on her deathbed exclaimed was the greatest regret of her career. She relied on the case McIntosh that incorporates the doctrine into United States legal jurisprudence. I'm wondering, with the repudiation, is there any attempt at the state level to really comb through the case books and find any laws with precedential value that, create the body of common law and rely on the doctrine? And is there any attempt legislatively to remove those cases from having any type of precedential value or overturning them on the basis of them relying on this doctrine of discovery, which for those that don't know is a papal bull from the 1400s that say that non-white Christian people are not entitled to hold land, and was very much the basis of the 1910 Benson case.
Well, I'll take a crack at that, I guess. I haven't done a bill yet to overrule that is consistent with, that would work with the Pope here. So this will be new. But Thiele, I think that, certainly that's something we could incorporate into the legislative findings, of what the Pope did in 2023 and the whole thing of the doctrine of discovery. It's another, basis, I think, for the legislation. But regardless, I mean, we're still looking, this Benson case should be overruled. And, there should be a statement from in the form of legislation from New York State saying, that was wrong. And we're reversing that. But I could see where that, it's another argument, and I think it's something we could put in to this year's version of the legislation.
Awesome.
John is asking why the governor exercised her veto on this. I think you alluded to the fact that she was relying on this, faulty information prior, the case that you were talking about. But why don't you go ahead and answer that properly?
Why did the governor exercise her veto? Well, I can say what she said in, in the veto, and let me go back a little bit. The Ukachoks, the Puspatoks, were recognized by state legislation in 1978, and it was fairly simple. The legislature passed the act, and the governor signed it. It was Governor Carey. The first time this was vetoed, it was Governor Cuomo, and kind of out of whole cloth, he created this whole process that they wanted the Montauketts to go through before that they would consider recognition. There was really no basis for that in law. It was something I think the governor did just to kind of push this off. So they've basically created this process which Sandi has worked on, and here we are 10 years later, and the goalposts just keep moving. It never quite get there.
I can add. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But I mean, if you read the veto message, it'll be that this process isn't finished yet. That's why she vetoed the bill. I have my own theory, which I will, climb out on a limb and talk about. When the unmarked burial bill got vetoed, a little over a year ago, there was a lot of opposition from real estate interests, and I still think that that's at work here. Just my opinion.
Oh, and if I could add something to that, New York State created a methodology because I've been asking a question about why they just copied some of this stuff directly, because you can map it back to the federal government's regulation. And they call it a methodology. They never passed any regulation or law or anything, say this is the procedure a tribe has to follow to be recognized in reinstatement. That didn't happen. They just went down and grabbed the stuff out of the federal government regulations and sent it out. And then in 2015, as Thiele knows, in 2015, they actually the federal government made the process much easier. They went in and tried to make it not as burdensome, and look at things a little different way. And, but the state didn't. They've asked for, I started working on it in 2017, and they've been asking the most ridiculous questions. That's why they have thousands of pages of papers. Also, part of the problem is there's no department in the state of New York that just handles Native American affairs. There's no department like the federal government has, that just looks at their Indian people. Yep. I mentioned earlier today to Fred, maybe that should be a bill down the road. Oh, and then I have to mention too, I guess some of the tribes upstate, and I know Harry was involved in it too. They wanted to, Harry is Chief Wallace from the Unkachug. They wanted to have someone represent us in the state. And they wanted some input in who would represent us. But the governor's office went and hired a very nice person. They hired Elizabeth Rule as Deputy Secretary of First Nations. But the only thing, she's from west of the Mississippi and knows very little about New York State. And she's a very nice person, though. Yeah. So it's a lot of problems, all kind of, I look at it as woven into this whole thing. It's not about us. It's about how New York State treats and reacts to their Native American community. There's no social justice there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So looks like there's no more questions, Catherine.
Okay. Thanks, Jerry. Just a quick question. I mean, Fred, you mentioned that the Benson case should be overruled, which sounds absolutely the right thing to do. Is it going into court?
You know, we're doing it with legislation. You know that.
Okay.
You know, there was a court case in I forget how many years ago, where a judge referred to this case as being of dubious propriety. You know, but the case wasn't before the judge, so we couldn't overturn it. You know, to me, you know, the best way to do this is to provide recognition through legislation. But, you know, court action, you know, is something that I know that you know, Sandi still and the Montaukett still hold as, you know, still could be a possibility. But, you know, this is the way we're pursuing this at the moment.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Sandi. I really appreciate your time tonight. And I want to hear more about the book club. If you want to just say a minute, when will the book club meet? And
we'll start meeting about the second week in February. We meet every Thursday, every other Thursday, I think it is. And we meet by Zoom. We have had last fall, we did it with the Walt Whitman birthplace, but we started the book club the first year of the pandemic, which is 2020. And we've had as many as 81 people, you know, participate. The last book we read was a great book, if you want to read it. It's by Ned Blackhawk. It talks about the rediscovery of America.
all right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great book. We actually spent the fall going through it. And it's so we'll actually start And this year, actually, Connecticut State Park is one of the sponsors of it. And there's a couple other people too. And then we're probably back in the fall at Walt Whitman.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Well,
Oh,
let's
you're
be in
welcome.
touch about the information. I can share it with people who
Yes.
might want to join the group.
We're also doing a number of speaker series. Last year we did one where we had John Strong, and everybody knows John. John Strong, Chief Harry Wallace. Chief Harry Wallace spoke on language. Marguerite Smith talked about the boarding schools. Lance talked about whaling. Professor Linford Fisher from Brown University was on. He talked about the missionaries because his book and about the missionaries is very important to the whole recognition with the state and also, I mean, with the federal government, and also understanding where the clusters were, because Isaiah Horton would stop at each one of the clusters as he made his way from Jamaica out to Montaukett to preach.
Thank you. Yeah, send me some of that information.
I definitely will.
Pass it along. And I see in the chat that Jean Marie Merkel's mentioning that Shelter Islands Book Club is going to be looking at Ned Blackhawk's book is starting in March. So Jean, if you have a link that you could drop in the chat as to how people could get more information about that, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, so let's, at this point, let's pivot in the meeting to a talk about the New York State 2024 legislative session. And I just want to give Fred his due. He is always ever ready to come and speak with Peer on any issue at any time. He has been our assembly person in Albany since 1995. And before that, he was the Southampton town supervisor. He was also in the county legislature and worked as a town attorney before that. So he's been steeped in in advocacy on Long Island for a long time. And we don't know what we would do without him representing as a voice of conscience a lot of the issues that are confronting our area. So Fred, please, if you would, we're going to pass it over to you to tell us what's on tap for this year.
Well, thanks, and I appreciate you having me again, and it was great to be able to weigh in a little bit on the issue with the Montauketts. It is one of those things I felt and feel very passionate about. It's interesting. I grew up here in Sag Harbor, lived there all my life, and didn't know the history of what happened to the Montauketts actually until I became the planning board attorney in East Hampton in the 1980s. And when land was being developed in Montauk, this whole story of what happened to the Montauketts was something that I learned about. And I said, if I ever get the chance to do something about that, and I got elected to the legislature, and I've been trying ever since. So I'm hoping that it will ultimately we will be successful. But in addition, it is we are 1 month into the 2024 legislative session, and for us, the first order of business is also always the state budget, and this year's state budget is a little bit different than it's been in the last few years, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But let me just kind of outline for you the state budget process, where we are, how it will proceed. And, each year the budget process starts with the governor presenting the executive budget, which is her budget proposal, for the coming fiscal year. Our fiscal year starts on April 1st. It runs from April 1st from April to March. So, we're looking at the budget for the coming fiscal year. The governor released her budget a couple of weeks ago. That is the beginning of the process. We are now engaged in hearings on the budget. I happen to be in Albany at the moment. We had session today, and we had a budget hearing today. And we'll be holding hearings on the budget for the next few weeks. I think we finish with our budget hearing somewhere around the middle of February. And it's by subject area. One day it'll be education, another day it'll be transportation, environmental conservation, et cetera. Those hearings give the various state agencies as well as the public the opportunity to be heard on what the governor has proposed. And after those hearings are concluded, the next item after that is an agreement on the amount of revenue. It's like doing your personal budget or the family budget. The first thing you have to decide is how much money do you have to spend. So the governor, the Senate, and the Assembly have to agree on how much revenue we have. If we can't agree, the tie goes to the comptroller. If we don't come up with a number, the comptroller, it defaults to the comptroller. Once we know how much revenue we have, each house of the legislature will pass their priorities, their spending priorities. We call them one-house budget bills. So by the middle of March, there'll be the governor's executive proposal. There'll be the Senate one-house bill. There'll be the Assembly one-house bill. And then hopefully between the middle of March and by April 1st is when we're supposed to have a budget. We'll have conference committees, and the governor, the Senate, and the Assembly will attempt to work out the differences between the three proposals, and hopefully that will yield a budget by April 1st. Last year, it took a little bit longer. We didn't have a budget until May 2nd, but hopefully, we will be on time this year. So, a couple of things about the governor's budget proposal this year. One is that unlike the last few years, when the state government had received substantial sums of money during COVID from the federal government, I don't usually say it this way publicly, but the last year or two, the state was rolling in dough. I mean, usually we're trying to balance the budget and deal with potential deficits. That was not the case the last couple of years. And, we were talking a little bit about school aid. After 15 years, we were finally able to fully fund the foundation aid formula, which unfortunately the governor is about to undo with her proposal this year. But we were able to fully fund the school aid formula, so that, districts were getting the amount of money that they were supposed to get under the formula. And, a lot of the issues in the budget the last couple of years, they were not so much about budgets and spending priorities, but about the kind of policy issues that the governor was trying to put into the budget. If you recall, issues like bail reform and the housing compact, we were talking more about policy matters than spending priorities. And that really isn't the case with this year's budget. If you look at what the governor's proposed, you won't find a lot of, broad, groundbreaking policy initiatives. I mean, there certainly are proposals in it, but, the real focus, I think, this year is going to be on spending priorities. We have to balance the budget. We don't print money like the federal government, so we have to balance the budget every year under the Constitution. And, we're facing potential deficits in the out years. So unlike the last couple of years, that makes this year's budget and, deciding about what to spend money on, much more difficult. There simply, there are issues with regard to revenue, and we can certainly talk about, some of the revenue raising proposals that we've spoken about in the past. But one of the things I'll mention right up front that I think is going to be, a major focus in this year's budget is school aid. The two major things we spend money on is education and health. And that usually comes down to school aid and Medicaid. And those are going to be the two big issues this year in the budget. The governor is looking to cut aid to education to over 300 school districts in the state of New York, including 21 of the 24 districts I represent. And she's also looking to limit Medicaid spending, which is very difficult for a lot of hospitals and nursing homes, locally. So, the school aid proposal, I think, is really gotten a lot of attention. After fully funding the foundation aid formula, the governor is looking to reduce, foundation aid, as I said, to more than 300 districts. There is not a lot of support for that in the legislature. Both parties, don't want to see reduction in aid to their school districts. One, it's bad for education. And two, all 213 members of the legislature are running for re-election this year, and nobody wants to go back home and say they cut aid to their local schools. So, I think that's going to be a major focus, which school aid used to be, before the last couple of years. So I think that's going to be, an issue. The governor has made it quite clear that she does not want to increase taxes. So, there certainly is already some talk, although it's early in the legislature, of resurrecting, I think there was 5 different proposals that were part of the Ione package of basically raising taxes on wealthier New Yorkers, corporations, high earners, things of that nature. There is some discussion already about that. I have a letter on my desk asking me to sign a letter to the speaker, which I did last year, which I will do again this year. But, the governor has kind of drawn a line in the sand about, not increasing any taxes at all, and staying with the current, tax structure. So, just a couple of things, kind of local interest in the budget. The state has a water quality infrastructure act where we fund things such as water main extensions in areas that have contamination, like from PFAS or PFOA, and those dollars have gone to places like Wainscott and East Quogue and Hampton Bays and West Hampton, where there's been contamination, from emerging chemicals. We have, for the last 6 years, we funded that at $500 million a year. The governor is proposing to cut that in half, only $250 million, which is not is something we certainly aren't going to be supporting in the legislature. While the Environmental Protection Fund is funded again at $400 million, which is the same level as last year, the governor is taking $25 million of that and utilizing it for things such as salaries and offsets, and taking it away from other programs like farmland preservation. So, the governor's got a number of different things in here where she's trying to eliminate this deficit almost exclusively with reductions in expenditures, and some of them are in critical areas like the environment and water quality. So, we can talk about that a little bit with the budget. I just want to mention also, because, once we finish the budget, we'll be looking at other priorities, just some of the things that are out there that are of local interest, that are, on my priority list. And then, the best part of this is really just to open it up to questions. But, I was one of the co-chairs of a commission on the future of LIPA that came up with a proposal to, basically get rid of the third-party management structure that we have, where LIPA contracts with a private utility company to run our electric utility, and to make LIPA a truly self-governing public utility. And that report, also estimated that over the next 10 years, we could save $500 million by, not having to pay for PSE&G's profit and the management fee that we have to pay them. So, that legislation, I've introduced that legislation this week in Albany in the State Assembly, and that is certainly something we want to move forward this year. The contract with PSE&G Long Island expires at the end of 2025. This isn't something you can do in a month or two. If we're going to transform LIPA into a true public power company, we need to do it, in this session in the next few months. So that is going to be a priority. The Suffolk County Water Quality Restoration Fund. This is something we adopted last year that would have had a dedicated 1/8% sales tax, would generate $3 billion between now and 2060 to basically upgrade our wastewater structure. And on the East End, that means upgrading septic systems and cesspools to IA systems that are nitrogen removing. We passed that in Albany, giving that authority for Suffolk County to put it on the ballot, but the Suffolk County legislature refused to put it on the ballot, this past November. Now we have a new county executive. We're working with the new county executive maybe to make some tweaks to this in Albany so that we can get it on the ballot this November. We're not quite there yet, but we're going to try to get there. So that is a water quality is a major priority for this year. I also wanted to talk about the South Fork commuter connection. That is our, the train service, the commuter service that we run from Spionk and Hampton Bays to East Hampton and Montauk. It has been an incredible success. Every month, it seems to have more and more riders. The only issue has been that the only complaint I get about it is that there's not enough service. We have one track in and out. We can run one train every 2 hours, and that simply isn't convenient for people. People whose schedule it fits love it, but that's not everybody. So we need to make modifications to the Long Island Railroad infrastructure, the track from Spionk to Montauk. And we don't need a second track. We just need strategic places along the track, sidings, SIDING, sidings where trains can pass each other, can pull off and pass each other. And instead of having one train every 2 hours, we could have a train, every half hour, which I think would, substantially increase the service. I was able to convince the Long Island Railroad to include this project as part of their 20-year assessment. It's a $260 million infrastructure package for Spionk to Montauk. This year is a critical year because this is the year that the Long Island Railroad and the MTA does their 5-year capital plan for the next 5 years. We need to get this project included in that capital plan. And we're going to have to really manage and wage a major advocacy campaign to the MTA because we don't have the numbers out here that they have in Western Suffolk or Nassau or in the city. They look at this and say, well, the ridership isn't that great out there. It's great for us, but, compared to people going into the city, it doesn't compare. So that I think has to be a major priority for us this year. Two last things. One is I'm going to go back to the governor's budget for now. You remember the governor's housing compact last year. She kind of backed away from that, as you were aware. There was a lot of would have taken home rule away. And we talked about that a year ago and what the problems were with that. But now, the governor's taking a more cooperative approach with incentives. But one of her proposals is to put $500 million in the budget to generate 15,000 housing units statewide on state-owned properties. And one of those state-owned properties is the Southampton campus, taking the portion of the campus where the dorms used to be when they were utilized, and utilizing the part of the campus that where those abandoned dorms are for affordable housing. So that is in the budget. You know, we don't have a lot of details yet about what the specifics of that proposal would be. But I think that, between, a hospital on the campus, trying to provide more educational opportunities, housing would be part of a good mix there. It's something that you should be aware of. And, the last thing I just want to talk about is we're after 25 years, we have 25 more years to go. We're looking to, tweak the Community Preservation Fund, take the lessons we've learned over the last 25 years, look at what our priorities are for the future, and, make some minor modifications to the Community Preservation Fund, maybe an increased emphasis on a little bit more on water quality, where a lot of the needs are going forward, and also coming up with a sustainable program for historic preservation and cultural resources. And I know Thiele is on, and she was at one of those meetings, and we talked about recognition in the Community Preservation Fund of the cultural resources, the resources of our Indigenous people that need to be protected through the Community Preservation Fund. And we'll be looking to include some of that in the language for the Community Preservation Fund. So just to be clear, we're not, changing the primary or the basic purpose, which is to protect community character. But, we have learned some lessons over the last 25 years, and, priorities have shifted as there's less open space and farmland to be protected and preserved. There's more emphasis on things such as cultural resources, historic properties, and water quality. And we're trying to recognize that so we can get the most effective use of the CPF between now and when the program expires in 2050. So there's kind of a, shotgun, whole bunch of issues that we're looking at for 2024. And, glad to open it up to questions and about anything I talked about. And I'm sure there are things that I didn't talk about that we could discuss also.
Okay. All right. So Catherine Levy has a question related to the education cuts and Senator Palumbo's position on the cuts and what, if anything, we can do about this.
Yeah, listen, when it comes to education funding, our Long Island delegation acts in a very bipartisan fashion. And, I think both sides of the aisle, both houses, there's been the expression of opposition to what the governor's proposing. The one thing I would mention, and I'm sure this won't come as any great shock to you, I've been, and Palumbo hasn't been part of this. So let me just say that right out front. I'm not talking about Tony Palumbo about this, but, there's an effort by the other side of the aisle, by Republicans in the state legislature and Republicans in Congress, because there's a special election going on, for the Santos seat in Nassau County. So you're seeing some of our Long Island Congress members and some members of the state legislature on the Republican side, trying to juxtapose the governor's proposal for $2.4 billion to assist with the migrant crisis in New York State and New York City. And basically how they're phrasing this is the governor has her priorities wrong. She's taking your school aid money and giving it to migrants. So, that's been their messaging on this. So, need to be aware of that, and certainly, that is the typical divisive approach to, to any issue that involves immigration. But so Palumbo's been great. That was the original question. I kind of got to a broader position on this, but No, we're all united, Tony and I, to work to get these funds restored for education.
Okay, all right. Catherine Zoka.
If I could step in there, just I want to ask a follow-up to that for just a
Sure.
minute. The Republicans are very good at like shifting the emphasis and taking and doing what you just described. And I'm just wondering, have you seen the Democrats countering that argument so that, we can not fall into this trap as often happens?
Well, I mean, some of the initial response has been to the members of Congress that have tried to exploit this would be is, hey, if you fix the immigration laws in the country, we wouldn't have to spend $2.4 billion in the city and state. So,
Yeah.
that's been part of it, I think.
So Catherine, do you want to ask your question about CPF going to referendum?
Yeah, just two parts to what you just mentioned about updating the CPF. Does the update require going to a referendum? And secondly, could affordable housing be included as, helping to preserve our community?
Well, we have the separate fund for affordable housing, and the money's starting to roll in now for the community housing fund, which 4 of the
Sure.
5 towns approved.
But there's so much more money in the CPF and the 5 million. Well, anyway, we could certainly.
Yeah, no, we're going to keep those separate, and whether or not we require a referendum remains to be seen. It depends on, for example, if they're just around the edges kind of tweaks, it doesn't really trigger a referendum. But for example, I don't know whether we're going to do this or not, but one of the things that's been discussed is right now only up to 20% of the fund can be used for water quality. I think if we were going to increase that percentage, that was originally enacted by a referendum. If we were going to change that percentage, I would think we would put it on the ballot.
I mean, is that something you would want to see happen, or do you have a position on that?
We're looking at it. Basically what we've asked the towns is to show us that, they're, that 20%, they've been usual, they haven't had enough money for water quality as it is. And I'm not sure that they've demonstrated that yet.
Okay. So I'd like to ask and dig a little further on the revenue raising bills. As you know, PEER has been supporting and is a member of this Invest in Our New York coalition. And they actually, underwrote a Siena poll that was done that showed that taxing the ultra wealthy and large corporations was extremely, extremely popular in New York State. So, and also they talked about deficits, that the projected deficits have sort of disappeared. I mean, the revenues have been coming in higher than anticipated, and that's not uncommon in prior years as well. So I guess, Fred, what I'm talking about is that there is an appetite for raising revenue and taxing this particular area of large corporations and wealthy people. And for the governor to say she's not looking to, she's not going to tax anyone, I mean, that's always said as well. And it's kind of a negotiating tactic, et cetera, and how strong we push. So I guess, what am I looking? I don't know if I'm asking a question here or.
Yeah, so I'm glad to comment. Trying to do revenue raisers last year, there were surpluses, so it was very hard to get any traction. Right. And you're right. I mean, listen, the governor always lowballs the revenue in early on in the process, right? And then suddenly, look, we have more money than we thought. And I would agree with you that, for the coming year, not so hard to at least balance the budget. But in the out years, when you get, another year out, 2 years out, 3 years out, then it gets really hard without raising revenue. So I think you have to kind of look, longer term on this. And, listen, this will be, as it has been in the past. I mean, this will internally within the majority in the assembly, this will be a major discussion going forward. And I'm not sure how much of it is a negotiating position of the governor's and how much of it is she's stuck on. So we'll see. You only find out when the negotiations get going, right? So
Right. I
we'll
mean,
see.
and also one of her main points is that, she doesn't want to tax them because they're going to leave New York. Well, the only people that are leaving New York are the middle income and lower income people because they cannot afford to live. It's housing. It isn't
Yeah.
about taxing. The people being taxed, the higher, the wealthy, ultra wealthy, and large corporations, they're not leaving. It's everybody else.
Well,
So-
that is true. I mean, that's been documented. So
Yeah. So, all the more ammunition to say, let's raise the, revenue that we need to give everybody a better lifestyle in New York State, and nobody will be leaving. We have good schools and housing, etc. So let's see, any more questions? Anthony Ernst. Let's see. How much is the Southampton CPF fund, and why hasn't some been applied to buying the Shinnecock Hills property?
okay, so during the pandemic, the amount of money that Southampton was generating in the Community Preservation Fund, I think in 2021, I think they may have generated, or 2022, they may have generated $100 million in 1 year. I'll give you 5 town numbers. In 2019, before the pandemic, 5 towns generated 77 million in the Community Preservation Fund. And in 2021, it increased to 210 million. It almost tripled. That's how much, what happened with the housing market out here. And, hey, the good news is that put a lot of money in the Community Preservation Fund. The bad news is that it decreased, the amount of housing supply that's left and how the prices have been driven up has exacerbated the affordable housing crisis. So, I don't really take any great joy in the fact that we tripled the amount of money in CPF, because it meant, when you have that kind of disjointedness in the marketplace, it creates other problems. So the answer to your question is, the revenues have kind of returned to a more normal level, which is still like $60 million a year for the town of Southampton. I know that, working with the Peconic Land Trust, some properties in the Shinnecock Hills have been acquired. And, if Thiele is on the phone, on the line, still here, she could address that better than I could, because she's been involved with that. But, the decisions about, and I can't speak to individual properties because those decisions are made by the town. And, so I can't speak to what their priorities have been and what they've done and haven't done, because, those are decisions that the town board can better make, because, it's a state law, but it delegates the authority, to create a fund and to administer the fund to each of the towns.
Okay. All right. Da-da-da-da. I think that's all the questions in our chat, Catherine.
I see a
think
lifer
there's one-
question.
There's one from Joanne.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Let's see. Are there any Long Island legislators we need to be concentrating on to get the LIPA bill passed? Monica Martinez in the Senate is supposedly not in favor. Is there anyone else we really need to work on?
Yeah, I would say this. There was only one negative vote on the commission for the public power report, and that was Monica Martinez. So you might want to talk with her a little bit about that. You know, I would say this, I think we are in pretty good shape in the assembly. Those of you that know Assemblymember Solage from Nassau County, she and I have really kind of tag teamed this, and she's a strong supporter. We introduced the bill in the legislature this week. We had bipartisan support, for the bill in the assembly. The Senate is, I think, the weaker link. We only have 2 majority senators from Long Island. One is Monica Martinez and the other is Kevin Thomas. So I would focus, I think I would focus more attention, and Senator Sanders from the Rockaways also. Remember, the Rockaways in Queens are part of the LIPA service area. So Senator Sanders, Senator Thomas, Senator Martinez, we need more help in the Senate. And the other thing I would say also, the governor has to sign this. The governor has been like silent. She's been like the Sphinx when it comes to LIPA. She hasn't said anything. So, the governor's part of this also. But, we need to get it to the governor, and I would focus on those 3 senators.
Very
In
good.
fact, while I was waiting to come on, I was getting texts from Lisa Tyson about what we need to do on the Senate side. And, that's where we need more attention. So is on the Senate.
Can I break in? That's because they're having their Zoom, their conference meeting call right now while this is going on.
Okay.
Do we only need to get Long Island senators and assembly people to?
Well, it has to be passed by the full legislature.
Right.
But, this is a Long Island issue. The rest of the legislature is fairly indifferent about how LIPA runs. So they're going to defer to the Long Island delegation. They don't really have a dog, in this fight. So
I thought the first time it failed by 1 vote and it was an upstate person. And you also have some upstate places that are pushing for public power, and there's some people opposed to it upstate too.
yeah, I think Joanna, your point's well taken in that I think, this is kind of seen as like kind of the tip of the spear on public power. If it can happen on Long Island, maybe it can have in other parts of the state. So I would say this, I would think that the private investor-owned utility industry is certainly, they're going to weigh in on this. But, most of our colleagues, where upstate got involved with LIPA, it was when we wanted to try to get hydropower from upstate New York. They never want to let go of their hydropower. It's cheap and it's there, and that is that's their only interest when it comes to LIPA, that we don't take their hydropower.
Okay.
Okay.
Thiele, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Of the financial projections of, like, is designating 30% of the funding of the CPF equivalent to what we would have expected in revenue from the water quality sales tax addition? Like, had it been put on the ballot?
No, 1/8% sales tax across Suffolk County, generates, I think the first year it generates all by itself 60 million. So no, it doesn't. It's not apples to apples. The Community Preservation Fund. For Southampton, if you increased it by 10%, that would be for Southampton be like an extra 6 million.
And then my second question, I know we had talked a little bit about this, but I just wanted to again bring up copying the intent in the Open Space Act to mandate that a minimum of 35% with a goal of 40% of the fund benefit disadvantaged communities.
Yeah, environmental justice. Yeah, yeah. I remember you mentioning that at the meeting. Yeah, that's on my list also. I didn't get a chance to mention it here, but
Awesome. Just know you have a lot of support with that.
thank you.
Okay. Catherine Zoka, affordable housing, go ahead. Oh,
Sure. Just Fred, you mentioned the governor has come up with another plan after what happened last year, and you mentioned the college. I guess two questions. Would all the units be affordable? And then secondly, does the state own other property on the East End that could possibly be used for affordable housing?
Yeah, I think it's critically important that the legislation that passes in the budget makes sure that it's all affordable. You know, the draft that's in the governor's budget proposal doesn't speak to affordability, like her plan last year didn't speak to affordability. But this isn't happening unless it's affordable. I can tell you that right now. It's not. So, but you know, I want it to be 100% affordable. So I happen to have a discussion with some of the members of leadership today about this, and emphasized how important it be that this be all affordable. So I'm confident about that, Catherine. The only other parcel land on Long Island that I've seen thus far is property at Farmingdale. Apparently, so that's not East End, but it's Long Island. Right now, it's the Southampton campus property that's been identified. Could there be others? There could be, but I can't think of anything that would fit as well, perhaps, as the campus does.
And I guess, is there any, it may be too soon, but number of units, is there anything that you could speculate regarding that?
Well, I emphasized with both Stony Brook University and the governor's office, there needs to be a community planning process. I don't want somebody in Albany or, in the state university deciding what this project should look like. They need to, have a community-based planning process that involves the community in deciding, how this is, how this project is developed. And, affordability certainly will be part of that, but density, and aesthetics are all extremely important. So, that's another thing here as part of this budget process, to ensure that there's a community-based process for determining what this project looks like.
Just as a follow-up to that, I mean, would it be possible to then establish their mixed use, for instance, and have retail shops there?
I certainly think that should be part of the discussion, because I think you want to build you want the community it to be a vibrant community on the campus,
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I don't want to. You have to balance it. You don't want to be competing with the Southampton Village Business District or the Hampton Bays Business District too. But there should be some amenities, certainly. Where you want to, if you want to get a loaf of bread, or you know what I'm saying. You don't have to get in your car and drive 10 miles, right? I mean, so, but I think that again, that should be part of the planning process.
Thank you.
but to follow up on that, Michael Daly says that Sag Harbor just received a state grant for a master plan. Greenport is applying as a pro-home community. Do you see state incentives we should be taking advantage of?
Well, the governor, and again, we need to see some of the details on this, but the governor has said that, being designated as a pro-housing community is going to give a benefit to the communities in applying for many state grants. So we need to see the details on that, but that's what we were talking about last year. Don't have a state override of local zoning and state mandates. Do it with incentives. So I think the governor took that to heart. The question, Michael, is what is that going to look like, right? And the key to these projects is infrastructure. So, if you're a pro-housing community and you're willing to do these projects, the state should be involved in helping to fund the infrastructure because, in a lot of cases, it's the lack of infrastructure that's just as important as the zoning.
Okay, shifting to another topic. As you know, PEER is a big supporter of the New York Health Act. So Catherine is asking, where does the Assembly and Senate stand on the New York Health Act?
Well, we have, the bill's been introduced, which is better than last year. We have a new health chairperson, Assembly member Paulin. So, I think we're going to get this thing, moving again, back on track this year. So, there's nothing in the budget. The governor didn't propose anything on this, but, there remains a lot of interest in the New York Health Act. And, I think, the last couple of years, this thing kind of, there was a lot of momentum just before the pandemic. And I think, this thing is going to gear up again now.
But also, I think, Fred, that there's been a lot of discussions with the unions, understanding how big.
I think it's the biggest issue. Biggest issue is the unions. Politically, talking about politically,
yes,
that's a big issue.
Right. And but there's discussions, and my understanding was that those bills were modified to some extent or amended to accommodate those concerns.
I know the sponsors are trying to,
Okay.
Well, let's
without gutting the bill or
exactly. And so, listen, we're all aware of that, and I know that those discussions have happened and that they will continue with the unions.
Okay.
Just as one follow-up to that regarding the New York Health Act, Fred, and the governor's, grave concern about taxes. I mean, there is the argument that the New York Health Act will reduce taxes, property taxes, because individual communities will not have to pay so much for Medicaid. Is that a persuasive argument to get her ear?
I think it's a persuasive argument, period. And there are savings to be had, and the scare tactics on the other side is that you have to, you have to look at both taxes and what people pay in co-pays and what they pay in paying for health insurance and those things. And, you got to make it an apples to apples comparison. But you're right. I mean, for county government, the cost of Medicaid is one of their, we've capped Medicaid for the counties, but it's still one of their biggest expenses. And if you take that off the property tax base and the sales tax base, and you're going to see a benefit on the property tax.
Yeah. Okay. So did I miss any questions? I don't think so. What time? It's
I just added one.
8:01. What?
I just added one.
Oh, you did. Joanne, go ahead, ask it.
I saw. Rich Schaefer doesn't support the LIPA, and is there any way to overcome that kind of collusion? I don't know if that's the right word, between Monica Martinez, who's friends with Kara Hahn, who's the wife of Chris Hahn.
Yeah.
Monica's brother works for Rich Schaefer, and the Long Island PAC has given them lots of money. And should we be working on town supervisors in order to get Hochul to come on board?
Well, I think you certainly should be working on, town supervisors. And, I think Romaine had, Romaine was on the community advisory board for this. And I don't think he's been a fan of PSE&G. So
no, he's testified when you had the hearing in Brookhaven a few years ago. Yeah.
So I think it's all of that, listen, there are certain interests that are opposed to this. First and foremost, PSE&G has spent millions of dollars lobbying against the commission, lobbying against this. You know, they have a lot at stake. And you know, I'm not. I read what you wrote in the chat. I'm not going to comment on it, but I'm not going to disagree with it either. So, you know, those are all factors we have to deal with here. But you know, we need to get some momentum going here. And you know, we were talking about the New York Health Act and unions. Our ability to get you know, a favorable response from IBEW on the report was very helpful.
Yeah.
This would not pass with the if there was opposition from IBEW, and they, you know, we worked very hard with them. They are fine with this legislation. So I think, you know, they're an important part of this equation also.
Can you just briefly explain, because I didn't quite understand it, how you got the union pension? That was a pension thing and not being considered state.
Well, the union's position is pretty simple. You know, they simply want to be in the same position they are in now with regard to their pension and with regard to their contract and their benefits. And you know, I'm not going to get into all of, you know, there were a couple of different ways to do this. I mean, LIPA is already a public authority. You know, you know, the union wants the protection of the National Labor Relations Board. They don't want to lose that. So, you know, we had a similar situation for those that are on the South Fork. You know, Southampton Hospital was, you know, community hospital, and they were all, you know, 1199. They were private sector workers, and then Stony Brook took them over, and they wanted to maintain their benefits. And we were able to come up with a legal mechanism to be able to do that. You know, we're able to do the same thing here. You know, there's this thing called Servco, which is like you know, they're actually the entity. They're like a subsidiary of LIPA that really hires the employees. And I don't want to get into all the, you know, I'm not a labor lawyer, so I won't explain it perfectly anyway. But, you know, there are legal mechanisms to protect the rights of the union, and they are completely confident that we have done just that with the way that we've drafted this.
Okay. So listen, I think that about wraps us up with the questions. I'm sure there's going to be more, but we'll have Fred back. But Fred, thank you so much for your time tonight and for kind of setting the table about what we need to work on going forward. Let's stay in touch very closely over the next few weeks and months as to how we can help. And, you know, please reach out if there's anything that we can do you know, that you see.
Well, and again, thanks for having me. And, you know, as you can see, there's a lot of things on the agenda that are important. So, you know, I'm surprised Jerry didn't answer this question, but we're going to get the New York Heat Act into our one-house budget bill too. So
yeah, okay.
Yeah. We'll see if it makes the final cut, but it's going to be in our one-house budget bill. I'm confident. So, all right, everybody, have a good night.
Okay, thanks, Fred.
Signing off from scenic downtown Albany. Have a good evening.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
And everybody, just stay for a few more minutes. We're going to wrap up with some final announcements. I just want to make the first quick announcement. Our next meeting is going to be February either 20th to 22nd, and it's going to be kind of taking a pulse of PEER, where we're at and what we're going to do going forward in 2024. So now I think Catherine Levy has an announcement to make about a NYPAN, successful NYPAN film screening.
So I think you all know that NYPAN is the umbrella organization of which PEER is a part. We started a film series last year. We've done 5 films so far, and about 2 weeks ago, I guess, we screened Israelism. It was by far our most successful screening. I think it's the most successful event we've ever done. We had 900 people signed up for it online. 375 people showed up for the screening. for those of you who don't know about the film, although, there's been a lot of publicity around it. It's about changing American attitudes of American Jews, particularly young American Jews, to Israel and how that's affecting Israel, American policy towards Israel, and the way that Jews see themselves. There's a remarkable group of people in it: Noam Chomsky, Peter Beinart, members of Breaking the Silence, members of Rabbis for Ceasefire. It sort of centers on Simone Zimmerman, who's the remarkable director of the Jewish Peace Organization, If Not Now. We followed the screening with a discussion with one of the filmmakers, Aaron Axelman, who was the co-director, and a terrific woman, Rabbi Miriam Grossman, who is a member of Rabbis for Ceasefire and a number of other Jewish peace groups. It was so successful, we had such a great reaction to it that we're actually thinking of doing a second screening, and we're going to discuss that in the coming week, and I will let this group know if it happens.
I want to comment on that. That was the.
No, I'm sorry, Joanna. We're way over time, so
Okay.
you know.
I can't hear you.
It was just wonderful, but if you want to show it again, also have speakers.
Okay, so yeah, just sorry, we just want to wrap up here quickly. We have another important announcements to make that Thiele wants to share with us. So Thiele, if you're still with us, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. I just wanted to put on everyone's calendar February 13th at 1 p.m. The Southampton Town Board is introducing a resolution to designate October 1st Shinnecock Nation Day in recognition of that day being the day that the federal government extended federal acknowledgement to the nation. And we would just love if anyone was able to either attend in person on Zoom or write in support of the resolution. We can circulate the resolution number and all the pertinent information by email, but if you could pencil that in, it would really mean a lot.
That's great. That's great. And Peer will be making a statement in support of that resolution. And the resolution was drafted by Michael Iacilli, who is a councilman for Southampton. And you might recognize Michael's name. We worked hard last year to help him win his election in November. So we should all feel good about that. And this is one of his first acts, which we feel very, very good about as well. So that's it from here. Any other announcements that people want to make about upcoming events?
I just want to mention that I put in the chat a link to sign a petition to Governor Hochul and our legislative leaders to raise revenue for our communities with these revenue raising bills. So if you all could sign that pledge, that would be great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jerry. Okay, everybody, click on that link right now. Sign that petition. Save the chat if you want. But thank you all for joining Peer's meeting this evening. I think we had a lot of information. The evening was recorded. So if there's anybody that you know who might be interested in watching but could not attend, it will be loaded up to Peer's YouTube channel in the next couple of days, and it will be posted on Facebook so people will know about that. So thanks all for the good works that you do. I hope everyone has a good evening. Stay safe and keep up the good work.